Having 12 people in the room is already a great number to share some insights on, well, moving from national metrics on circularity to the corporate side of stepping into measuring circular economy performance. And what we would like to do in this session, Susanne is here. Hi, Sus. And myself, Arnoud, we are from KPMG. We work daily on the circular economy with clients, and well, you know us as a company working a lot with say the CFO and the corporate control function. So metrics and reporting is where we're good at. As a short introduction, I would like to take you back 2 years. At that time, there was a growing group of corporate executives, we would say, that sat together and said to themselves, what we are lacking at the moment is a global language to talk about the circular economy. The rise on the agenda in the boardroom, as Jacco already mentioned, is absolutely there. And talk to our suppliers, to our partners and business partners, but we talk about the circular economy in different ways, in different definitions, and it's time to set a standard to move towards more uniformity, and also to more understanding on where you are as a company and how you can make the transition. And Suzanne will get into that later, towards a more circular operating model and business model. That was the driver to get the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a for business by business type of institution. Quite similarly, and that's the end of my introduction here. Quite similarly, like the greenhouse gas protocol at that, well, I would say 10 years ago was established, because there was no global language on how to define Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. So the objective was to come up with a global standard, and it took a while, and Suzanne will give a bit more details in how it came about and who was involved. So I would like to give you the floor here.
So we had a working group established by the WBCSD with several multinational companies. You can see on the screen. And there we yeah, this is, no, does it work? Do you see my screen? Yes. The objective of the framework was to provide insights on circularity for businesses. But what is also very important, the idea is not to stop with the actual performance, but really also to investigate and drive companies to move towards a more circular business, create longevity and resilience. We had also a review group in which various organizations that are listed in the bottom of the picture below reviewed along the way. Like you said, it was a 2-year process, so we also had quite some moments of public commenting, testing with companies, and further iterations. So this resulted in the CTI framework that was version 1.0 that was launched in January 2020 in Davos. I will go through the framework right now. Please feel free to raise any questions if you have along the way. So the framework, it consists of 3 modules on how to measure circularity as a company.
What we did in the working group with the WBCSD is to set up a set of modules that help the businesses that are part of it to get into, let's say, the different parts of this measuring circularity. So if you talk about the components of the framework, it's first and foremost to come up with a level of circularity. But there are modules designed like you see here again on your screen, that also tap into, for example, critical material questions and economic questions around the circularity assessment. So those three modules are the basics of the framework.
We have three modules. I will now dive into the basics of the framework. What the principle of the framework is that we want to avoid those red crosses at both ends. So this is also what we aim to measure. We say, okay, we want to avoid the extraction of non-renewable virgin resources and any losses of materials. And we also want to acknowledge both wings of the butterfly, so to say, so the technical and the bio-based biosphere. The biosphere is also included in here. There was a strange noise. And if we look at what does this mean at a company level, we measure the circularity percentage at 3 places within the company. So the first is the circular inflow. And this looks at, okay, which part of the flows, and this can be materials, but also products or parts, depending on the position in the value chain, are flowing into the company, and this can be influenced through procurement. Then we have the recovery potential, which is a theoretical question whether it's technically feasible and economically viable to bring back a product to a functional equivalent. And this is related to the design and can also be influenced by changing the design. Then the last step of the circular outflow is the actual recovery, which answers the questions, okay, what is actually recovered? So for that, you do not only need to have a design that allows for disassembly and recycling, but also the systems in place for take back. So maybe you changed a business model towards product as a service, or less radical, have set up additional schemes within your supply chain to top up the already existing open loop recovery. So, like I said, the aim of the transition indicators is also really to drive the transition. So therefore, there are 7 process steps, of which the first is the scope. So determine the boundaries for the assessment. Okay, is it a full business that is in scope? Is it a specific business unit, or maybe a site or a product group or product itself? Then select the indicators. So from the 3 modules, at least have the percentage circularity, but also see whether there's any additional indicators that can be relevant from the optimize or the value loop module. Collect all the data that is needed for the calculation. Perform the calculation, and this can also be done in the CTI tool. So there's an online tool developed by Circularity. And then the other steps, the analyze, prioritize, and apply, are really about contextualizing these results. So, okay, what does it mean? What does it mean for the company? How can the circularity be improved? Prioritize focuses on the risks and opportunities. So dive into which linear risks a company is facing and which circular opportunities there are to set up a business case. And then finally, the apply phase, to really come up with an action plan, targets on how to improve, be clear and concrete of what is to be executed, when and by who, and also to follow up with when this cycle needs to be entered again to ensure improvement and measurement over time. So maybe to dive into the percentage circularity. So like I said, the percentage circularity is the weighted average of the percentage circular inflow and the percentage circular outflow. So how do we define circular inflow? That is inflow that's either renewable, so that means that it's bio-based, but also that it is sustainably grown and harvested at a rate that replenishment can occur. So for example, it's certified, or it's at least of non-controversial origin, or that it's non-virgin content. So this can be, depending on where your position is in the value chain, it can be recycled content into materials, but it can also be second-hand products or refurbished parts entering the company. Then the circular outflow, like I said, it's the recovery potential. So the recovery potential looks, okay, is it technically feasible and economically viable to bring back a technical material to the functional equivalence of inflow? So that means, for example, that you will have a similar application and downcycling is excluded. Or for the more technical or the bio wing of the butterfly, the question whether it's biodegradable. And there the word bio is very important in degradable. So it's not the question, is it degradable over time, but and will it leave any pollutants in the biosphere, because then it's not biodegradable. And the other aspect, so this recovery potential is a prerequisite, but the other aspect is indeed the actual recovery. So is it, what are the standard recovery rates? So if you do not do any extra actions as a company to increase the open loop recovery, then you just work with in which markets you put it on the market and what are the collection and recycling rates in those markets. But if you have, then you can, for example, include information that you have because you remain the owner of the product by an innovative business model, or you have buyback schemes in place, or you have additional collaborations within your supply chain to increase the collection and recovery of your of the things you put on the market. Then we have the critical materials. So the reason that we include critical materials in the optimize the loop is because it's a weight-based indicator. So the indicator will push towards closing the heaviest loop first. But critical materials might also be relevant to dive into further. So these are materials defined by the European Commission or the UN, or the US has also a critical mineral list, etc. So there are more and more countries coming up with those lists. So these are, for example, materials that are have a high supply risk, it's high economic importance, but maybe also very hard to substitute because of their unique functionality. So by diving into these critical materials, it might be that you want to prioritize and focus your actions differently than only the weight. And the other indicator in the value loop is the recovery type, because within the closed loop module, there's no discrimination made between the different recovery types, because as we said, it is a generic framework. So it needs to be applicable for all different industries and all different players in the industry. So depending, of course, where you are in the value chain, it will be more or less possible to look for different circularity strategies. So if you're a material producer, then your main task is maybe to focus on using mono materials and designing them as such that they can be recycled. Well, if you're closer to the user, you will also want to go to more higher retained value options like reuse and repair. So this indicator will give you additional insights on the recovery types and will ask you to see, okay, can you stay as a rule of thumb, in every step a value is added and the highest value is retained the closer to the end user. Then the final indicator is in the value loop module. That's currently one indicator. It's likely that this module will be extended towards the future, and it focuses on the circular material productivity, which demonstrates decoupling. So it's the revenue divided by the mass of linear inflow. And some of the countries, they also use, for example, GDP divided by domestic material consumption. So this is a similar indicator. It will give you like €1 per kilogram. So it becomes mainly relevant over time to see the percentage improvement or decrease in decoupling. So like I already briefly mentioned, there is a CTI tool that can support companies with performing the calculations and having one central place to store the data related to these calculations to be able to also work in the next year and continue that assessment. I think I do not have so much time left, so I want to move to some questions rather than diving now into an example. So let's see whether there's any questions.
No?
Yes. Oh, I see. What is the biggest challenge companies face when trying to implement this tool? So what I think, what are some of the challenges is sometimes we see that companies do not have that much data yet available. For example, so quite often they have more available data available than they would expect maybe upfront. But they have not necessarily already asked the questions to the suppliers. What is the recycled content that is within this product, or how much of it is renewable? Is it certified, etc. So there we see that sometimes the conversation is only starting. So I think that is one of the challenges. I also see a question, how does this apply to food? What is important is that we currently also have a specific work stream on how the CTI applies to the bioeconomy. How it's currently described is that any stream that enters the metabolism of an organism, so that can be both human as other types of organisms, is considered to be recovered. So that's a circular outflow. What is important, however, is that if it's not, so for example, if you look at food waste going to landfill, then the recovery potential is there, but the actual recovery is not there because it's not entering the metabolism of an organism, but it instead goes to waste. So in that sense, food waste is considered linear. Food entering a person is considered circular, and there also it stops. We do not further continue. Okay, what happens after that? Do you have examples of companies that are already using the indicators? So most of the companies that you have seen listed contributing to the framework are also applying this framework, have tested it. Also beyond that, there are a couple of case studies online at the WBCSD website. And also there's quite a lot of companies that have registered for the tool and are exploring.
So in the Netherlands, for example, Philips has adapted its way of reporting externally. It's public to the CTI methodology, and DSM is one of the, well, you could say, founding parties of the working group here. Yeah.
Yeah.
But companies like NS, the Dutch National Railways, they are also going to go out with a case study that they apply to their operations using this methodology. So, yeah, that shows the sector agnostic way of applying this methodology. It can be applied to all different types of companies and value chains.
Yeah. So I also really curious about a case. So we had an example, but I don't think we have time for it. But we do have there are some online cases from DSM and Whirlpool published, and more cases will be added. So we can maybe share a link to the WBCSD website where these are stored. So for instance, to food ingredients that are eaten, so cannot be recovered. Yeah, so as food ingredients are part of the biosphere, we consider them to be recovered if they are eaten. Of course, some non bio based ingredients can also enter the metabolism of organisms, like I would say pharmaceuticals or medicines. And for those, it's of course a different case because those are part of the technical cycle. So then it's the question, what happens next with those? So recovery of nutrients is calculated. Yeah. So if it's part of the biosphere, it needs to re-enter the biosphere. So it needs to be composted or entering the metabolism, or of course some of the bio-based products can also be recycled. Okay, let's see. For the recovery potential, do you determine what is realistically recoverable? What counts as recovery in this metrics, as opposed to downcycling and recycling, for example? Yeah, so the question that is for the technical cycle is whether it's technically feasible and economically viable to bring back the outflow to a functional equivalent status of inflow. So that means, for example, if you would have plastics used in, say, a laptop, and you would be able to design it for disassembly. So the plastic parts can be taken off, and they can be recycled in such a rate that it can be applied again. In maybe it's not applied in a laptop, but in a phone or in a household appliance, then we all consider that a functional equivalence, because we also recognize that it's not always feasible to have a small loop closed. But if it would become I don't know, a pole next to the road or something, that's considered downcycling, because that's not functional equivalent.
Yeah. I see a question from Jan coming in, tapping into the CFO domain. What we envision, with working with our clients, not only on the metrics part, but also in shaping circular economy strategies, is indeed there has to be a strong belief that reshaping your value chain and reshaping the way you procure and also go to market, like Jacco introduced, is, well, you need intrinsic motivation. However, it also, of course, helps if there are short-term business benefits, and those are they differ per sector, Jan. So, for example, if you talk about refurbishing telecom assets, there is a clear business case to save cost and save materials at the same time. In other sectors, for example, talk about large volume consumer packaging type of products, it is much harder to find those very short-term business cases, but they are there. And at this moment, we see different types of developments. Low oil prices, for example, do not help, but shorten your supply chain or de-risk is also a business benefit, like Jacco already touched upon. So it's not always clear financial benefit, but those cases are accelerating at the moment.
Yeah, and they might also not be that direct always, like related to secondary material use, for example. And that's what we mainly highlight in the prioritize phase of the CTI, where we dive into the linear risks and opportunities. And then you see, for example, also what Jacco mentioned before, if do your talent still want to work for you? And maybe there's a cost saving in your talent acquisition or your customer acquisition if you have new business models that create a sort of lock-in. So the cost savings or benefits might not be always that straightforward. And therefore, I think it's good to also dive in really the linear risks and circular opportunities that is part of the sixth step of the framework.
Well, tapping into the last question, I think, and not only measure on the national level and global level, but really getting a grip on how are you able as a company to decouple your economics from material use, and that is something where Suzanne highlighted as part of the CTI. I would say a heartbeat to set that cycle going. And circularity is not only about storytelling; it's also about doing your homework and work with fact-based change management. So, how much time have we left, Suzanne, for this session?
Yeah, I think the original schedule we need to move back 10 past so exactly now. To the stage, but I don't know whether we get a warning.
So if there are some other burning questions, I think we have a little bit of time, and then maybe you take a little break and then go to the main stage again. SDG 17. Suzanne, have you?
Okay, yeah,
that's the collaboration part, right?
Yes, yeah. So partnering for circular economy is critical. We mentioned that very often, that collaboration is key. This is also what so we have a small introduction video on CTI of 2 minutes, and there I think it's mentioned many times. But I think this is also still quite a challenge. But as you could see from the pictures of the value chain, it is how circular you as a company are is also dependent on how your circular value chain is, and therefore you need to collaborate and partner. So I would say, both looking both ways within your value chain, but also do not forget to look also beyond that, because some of the solutions are not are quite innovative and are maybe not with the existing partners that you have today, but come from new collaborations and fruitful ideas. So I think there are some nice examples where special techniques or were found when looking to the neighbors rather than within the value chain.
Yeah, and last remark from my side on so coupling also to the topic of this session, so the metrics part, and speaking the same language with your partners on how do we define improving the level of circularity is a key, I would say, enabler to not have conversations that move into different directions and to make it too complex. So that's why the investment of the companies supporting this new standard, it's an open standard, are focusing on language sharing and having the same basis to collaborate on. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your questions so far. Doing good. So you mentioned, Suzanne, that there will be also a investment probably over summer to work on the value the loop. That will be indicators for the financial sector or CFO specific, right?
Yeah, and also look from an investor angle. So I think because it's not, especially the linear risks and circular opportunities, it's not only for the business in scope, but also for investors into that business, a relevant topic to get more insights on.
Yeah, so moving from business metrics to portfolio financial institution metrics, that will be the next step. Okay. Well, thank you all for participating. We were happy to share some insights on this development. We think it's exciting times, and let's indeed make our way into the main stage, like Marco is urging us. Thank you all, and bye-bye.
Thanks.